The neon lights of Bourbon Street flickered in the humid June air. It was 2012, and 22-year-old Jaren Lockhart had no idea her life was about to change forever. A young mom, a dancer, and a dreamer, Jaren was just trying to make ends meet. That night, she made a choice following a tempting offer. Tragically, it was a fatal one. What came next? A horror show. Body parts washing up on Gulf Coast beaches, a community in shock. Cops racing to crack a brutal, senseless crime.
You got me then. Y'all got me. Y'all got me baffled because I remember none of that.
We all make choices. None of them should end this way. Jaren's story was a heartbreaking one, but it was also a wake-up call. Danger can wear a friendly face, and some offers are just too good to be true.
Do you think that was just a ruse? That they were hunting to kill?
Absolutely.
We can honor Jaren by keeping ourselves safe, so let's find out what happened that summer night, all the horror that followed, and where her deranged killers are today. This is the shocking story of Jaren Lockhart, the innocent mom who trusted the wrong people. Jaren Lockhart was a 22-year-old single mother, engaged to be married and working as a dancer to support her 3-year-old daughter. Friends described her as a loving mom who was doing her best to provide for her child despite difficult circumstances.
She was a beautiful girl. She had a lot of people that loved her.
On June 6, 2012, Jaren was working her usual shift at Temptations Gentlemen's Club on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. Toward the end of her shift that night, Jaren was approached by a couple, Terry Speaks and Margaret Sanchez. The pair offered Jaren $700 to come dance at a private party. For Jaren, who was struggling financially, it seemed like an opportunity to earn some much-needed extra money. Security camera footage shows Jaren leaving the club with Speaks and Sanchez around 2 a.m. on June 6th. It would be the last time she was seen alive. When Jaren failed to return home after her shift, her fiancé, Jeremy Foster, immediately knew something was wrong. He tried calling her phone 15 times, but got no answer. As the hours passed with no word from Jaren, Jeremy filed a missing persons report. Her family and friends were frantic with worry, knowing it was extremely out of character for a devoted mother to disappear without contacting anyone.
We had learned we had a missing dancer from Bourbon Street.
Tragically, their worst fears would soon be confirmed in a horrific way.
A gruesome mystery washes ashore on the mighty Mississippi, leaving this chilling imprint in the sand of a headless body.
On June 7th, a torso washed up on a beach in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, about 60 miles east of New Orleans.
So this is the location where her torso surfaced?
Right, Bay St. Louis, Mississippi.
Over the next few days, more dismembered body parts were discovered along beaches in neighboring coastal towns. By June 9th, a head, arms, and legs had been recovered.
Now the next day, we got reports of different body parts that were spread about the beach, shoreline. Her head, her arms, and her legs had been removed.
It's hard to describe the horror of having to assemble these parts, and it's impossible to imagine how it felt for the detectives handling this case.
It had been in the water nearly 72 hours. It's kind of like when you've been in the water, you get all wrinkled up and discolored.
Investigators were able to identify the remains as belonging to Jaren Lockhart through her distinctive tattoos and piercings. But, disturbingly enough, her killers had tried to remove the bits carrying tattoos. They just didn't get to all of them.
Tattoos that were intentionally removed in an effort to keep the body from being identified.
Her clothes were also found nearby, matching what she had been wearing in both the security footage from Temptations. An autopsy determined she had died from a stab wound to the chest before her body was dismembered.
There were theories that the parts were dropped in different places just to keep all of them from being found.
The discovery of Jaren's mutilated remains sent shockwaves through the community. How could such a brutal crime happen to this young mother? And who was responsible for this heinous act?
I know she worked at the club next door, and She was a nice girl, always spoke, always smiled.
As the detectives began investigating, they released the security camera footage showing Jaren leaving the club with the unknown couple. This led to tips identifying the pair as Terry Speaks and Margaret Sanchez. Investigators learned that the two had been soliciting dancers at various French Quarter clubs that night, asking them to leave with them for a supposed private party. One dancer, Lacey Dillman, later told police that she had turned down their offer of $700, saying they creeped her out.
Around 1:30, she said that we have to find a girl or else something bad would happen. That's when I said I can't leave.
Unfortunately, Jaren, worried about making rent and supporting her daughter, had accepted their proposition.
We know she loves her child.
Jaren had a bit of a rough time financially. Her family was helping out in any way that they could, but they could not fully support her either. So she was excited for any opportunity to make quick cash.
We know that Jaren told a friend, a dancer friend, that she was going to do it, and they were going to pay her $700.
Do you think that was just a ruse? That they were hunting to kill?
Absolutely.
Further investigation revealed Terry Speaks was actually a fugitive, wanted in North Carolina for failing to register as a sex offender. He had a 2003 conviction for having intimate contact with a minor.
He gave off a lunatic vibe. I mean, that guy, I thought he was sick.
Terry's neighbor, John, heard him scream and howl from his yard, wearing only underpants. With sights like these every week, he knew he'd better stay away from him. Margaret Sanchez was also described by an acquaintance as strange and outlandish. The couple had worked at the same club as Jaren a few years earlier, Speaks as a doorman and a bartender, and Sanchez as a dancer. So although she did not know them well, Jaren knew their faces. This added a fake sense of trust to this sinister scenario. When Jaren accompanied them to their Kenner, Louisiana home, she thought that she would be out in a few hours. Instead, she was sliced open and dismembered in a black magic ritual. Just before dawn on June 7th, Speak and Sanchez's neighbor, John Slocum, saw them carrying out big trash bags.
I don't know if there was a body in there or what, but he was trained in putting them in there, put it that way.
John also mentioned smelling bleach coming all the way to his house. These two were cleaning something nasty. But before he could voice his concerns to authorities, they came knocking with a search warrant.
Take a look behind me. Police are actually searching this home as we speak right now. If you can see, there are members of Kenner Police Department. Also, there are bags of evidence right there in front of the house and a dog, a cadaver dog.
Jaren's body had been recovered and the surveillance footage had these two identified. There was nowhere they could hide. Speaks and Sanchez were arrested and charged with second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. However, the case against them was largely circumstantial. Despite the suspicious circumstances, there was no physical evidence directly tying them to Jaren's death. The house had been so thoroughly cleaned that no traces of DNA were found. And even as far as circumstantial evidence goes, it wasn't easy. The detectives had a hard time finding a motive.
She wasn't upset with them. They weren't upset with her. It's hard to believe. They just killed her just to be killing her.
There's a certain kind of deranged people that do this.
They probably had, some sort of arousal or some unbelievable satisfaction from doing this.
It's hard to believe that there are people out there who get a kick out of taking an innocent life. Sadly, though, there are. And as far as authorities were concerned, these two belonged in that category. In fact, it got even a little more disgusting than this.
Whether they were involved in some satanic ritual or they were worshiping someone, we never could establish that. But we do know that there was some evidence at the home, like an altar.
Jaren was not targeted specifically. Speaks and Sanchez had been out all night trying to find a female victim. She was a sacrifice. Apart from the altar inside their home and their decision to chop Jaren's body up into little pieces, there are a few more disturbing clues. 1, these two lived above a voodoo temple in the French Quarter. 2, remember Zach and 80?
My name is Margaret Sanchez, and Addie and Zach were two of my my very best friends.
Adie Hall was yet another young New Orleans artist who was gruesomely murdered and dismembered. Her boyfriend, Zach Bowen, was convicted of her murder, and Margaret Sanchez appeared in a documentary about it, claiming she was the best friend of this couple. The detectives now believe that Margaret had something to do with it. Perhaps just like Zach, she was into satanic rituals, and perhaps she'd even helped Zach do it.
And she would always just tell me, like, look, don't let a man rule you. She was like, you decide what you want in this life.
As the legal process dragged on, an unexpected break in the case came from an unlikely source: the suspects themselves. While in jail awaiting trial, Speaks and Sanchez exchanged numerous emails that prosecutors would later use against them. The messages contained incriminating statements and attempts to coordinate their stories. In one email, Speaks wrote to Sanchez, "You're the one they'll fry, and not me. Remember the boots? Remember the panties? Do you remember what you were wearing? Shall I go on?" Other emails showed the couple turning on each other, with Speaks threatening to implicate Sanchez if she didn't stay loyal to him.
Threatening her meaning, if I go down, you go down?
When she got married, there was some damning information there.
Another breakthrough came when the detectives realized Margaret did not even know her boyfriend's name. She thought Terry Speaks was Alan Rice. And when the authorities looked into him, they found a dozen fake names and IDs. So he was a repeat offender of the worst kind, and his crimes were only escalating. Now in custody, he was denying any involvement in Jaren's unaliving.
We didn't do anything. And that's the real reason. In my head, God's looking out for me.
He also said this:
"You got me then. Y'all got me. Y'all got me baffled because I remember none of that."
When pressure built up during his interrogation, Speaks claimed he actually had no memory of that night.
Dude, I got so many nights that are the same thing over and over and over.
Well, I do
that
too.
are so insignificant that I don't even think about them anymore.
And during one phone call to a family member, Terry Speaks clearly enjoyed the attention. This is the transcript. "Was I big on the news and all that? I was like just as big as the guy who did the Colorado bombing." When the cases finally went to trial, Speaks and Sanchez were tried separately. Speaks was convicted of second-degree murder in June 2015 and sentenced to life in prison without parole. To paint the whole picture of this delusional, deranged man, Terry Speaks represented himself throughout his trial. Although he had no education past high school, he was adamant that he was well equipped to stand before a judge and ensure he wouldn't go to prison. His opening statement was so outrageous, it was interrupted every minute by objections. He also gave a dozen conflicting statements. A year later, Margaret Sanchez took a plea deal, admitting to manslaughter, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. She had pled not guilty initially, but her attorney advised her that she could spend the rest of her life in prison, just like her deadbeat boyfriend. She was thus sentenced to 40 years in prison.
But today was the first time either of them admitted to the murder.
During sentencing, details emerged of the couple's twisted motivations. Prosecutors alleged they had killed Jaren as a part of a perverse sexual thrill with no true monetary motive for luring her from the club. The senselessness of the crime made it all the more tragic and disturbing. The convictions brought some closure to Jaren's grieving family, but the pain of her loss remains. Her young daughter, only 3 years old when her mother was killed, still struggles to understand why her mom was taken from her. Jaren's fiancé and relatives were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Jaren Lockhart's story is undoubtedly heartbreaking. A young mother, just trying to provide for her child, fell victim to two depraved individuals who saw her as nothing more than a target for their sadistic desires. While we can't change what happened to Jaren, we can honor her memory by learning from her tragic experience and taking steps to protect ourselves and others. It's important to note that Jaren was not to blame for what happened to her. The only people responsible for this heinous crime are Terry Speaks and Margaret Sanchez. Jaren was simply a young woman in a difficult financial situation who made a choice many of us might make if faced with similar circumstances. The fault is entirely with the perpetrators who took advantage of her vulnerability. That said, Jaren's case does highlight some important safety concerns we should all keep in mind, especially when interacting with strangers. Trust your gut instincts when it comes to personal safety. If someone or something feels off, even if you can't pinpoint why, listen to that inner voice. It could save your life, just like it did for Lacey Dillman. She turned down Speaks and Sanchez's offer because they creeped her out. Those instincts probably kept her alive. Be skeptical of deals that sound too good to be true, especially from strangers late at night. Easy money can be tempting, but it's often a red flag. Always let someone know your plans, where you're going, and who you're with. If Jaren had told a co-worker about leaving with Speaks and Sanchez, it might have led to a quicker response when she disappeared. Stick with friends when you're out, particularly after dark. The buddy system isn't just for kids, there's real safety in numbers. And think twice before getting into a car with someone you don't know well. Once you're in their vehicle, you lose a lot of control over the situation. In today's digital world, do some homework before meeting new people. A quick online search can often verify someone's identity or background, and when you do meet, choose public places first. Get to know them in a safe environment before going anywhere private. Listen to your friends and family if they express concerns about someone you're hanging out with. They might spot red flags you've missed. Have a safety plan ready. Know how you'd leave an uncomfortable situation, and have an excuse prepared if needed. Finally, remember it's always okay to say no. Do not let politeness or social pressure override your instincts. Your safety is more important than sparing someone's feelings. It is perfectly acceptable to decline any invitation or offer that makes you feel uneasy. While these precautions are important, it's equally crucial that we don't let fear control our lives or close ourselves off from new connections entirely. The vast majority of people we encounter are not dangerous predators. The key is finding balance between openness and caution, being friendly and social, while also prioritizing our personal safety. It's also worth noting that perpetrators like Speaks and Sanchez are the exception, not the rule. Most violent crimes are committed by someone known to the victim, not random strangers. However, Jaren's case shows that these types of predatory acts do sometimes occur, and it's wise to be prepared. It's also crucial that we as a society work to address the root cause that can make individuals vulnerable to predators. Poverty, lack of affordable childcare, and limited job opportunities can force people into high-risk situations out of desperation. By supporting local social programs and initiatives that help struggling families and single parents, we can reduce the chances of others ending up in Jaren's position. Ultimately, the most important thing we can do to honor Jaren's memory is look out for one another. If you see someone in a potentially dangerous situation, don't be afraid to speak up or intervene. A simple, "Are you okay?" or offer of assistance could make all the difference. Terry Speaks will die in prison. Margaret Sanchez will spend decades behind bars too. For Jaren's family, this is way too little. She has time. Something she stole from Jaren for her sheer demented pleasure. And no amount of prison time can undo the damage they caused and the pain they left in Jaren's loved ones' hearts. Jaren's daughter will grow up without her mother. Her family and friends will always carry the pain of her loss. And a young woman with her whole life ahead of her had that future violently stolen away. Yet, even in the face of such a senseless tragedy, we can find hope in how the community came together to seek justice for Jaren. From the law enforcement officers who worked tirelessly to solve the case, to the neighbors who provided crucial information, to the prosecutors who ensured Speaks and Sanchez were held accountable. Many people played a role in making sure Jaren's killers did not escape punishment. As we reflect on Jaren's story, let us commit to creating a world where such crimes are less likely to occur. A world where young mothers don't have to take dangerous risks to support their children. A world where predators like Speaks and Sanchez are identified and stopped before they can harm others. A world where we all feel a responsibility to look out for our fellow human beings. Jaren Lockhart was more than just a victim or a cautionary tale. She was a devoted mother, a loyal friend, and a young woman doing her best to build a good life for herself and her daughter. Those who knew her described her as fun-loving, creative, and always willing to help others despite her own struggles. In one of her last Facebook posts, Jaren wrote about overcoming adversity and growing from life's challenges. She said, "I am working every day toward my legacy. I wouldn't exchange my past experiences for the world. They are what have shaped me. Every trial, every heartbreak, every broken dream, every recrushed hope, and every loss has helped me grow mentally and spiritually. Jaren's words showed a maturity and resilience beyond her years. They also make the tragic shortcut of her life all the more poignant. We can only imagine what she might have accomplished if given the chance to continue growing and working toward her legacy. Jaren Lockhart's life was cut tragically short, but her story doesn't end there. Let us carry out her legacy by spreading kindness and love in our communities. Reach out to those who might be struggling. Offer a helping hand to someone in need. Create the kind of world Jaren would have wanted for her daughter. One where people look out for each other, and no one has to face their battles alone. Thanks for tuning in, you guys. What are your thoughts on this tragic case? Do you know similar stories that you'd like me to cover? Leave a comment, and before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. See you next time, and stay safe.